Right, David Michael, the Christ Shayler. It's 9/11 today, better known in Britain as the 9th of November. You're a man who seems to put a lot of importance into dates, significant days and numbers. It's Remembrance Sunday coming up soon. Is there something behind the veneration of sacred numbers? Or are you just a bit OCD?
Yeah, of course. I mean, people will say these are just calendar dates, but the point about anybody who knows about, for example, quantum mechanics knows that every number has a frequency, and the same with every colour does, and so on. So the significance of the numbers being repeated on the planet, particularly as they're created on computer screens across the world, gives those numbers themselves an extra energy. And obviously, number one is the prime number. When you see it recurring like that, you're seeing a pattern in creation, essentially. So I believe that we've come to the real 11th hour for mankind, essentially. That it has been widely predicted by many cultures, and certainly attested to by the Mayan long count calendar, that the world is going to end or change on the 21st or 23rd of December 2012. So now at 11/11/11, we really are at the 11th hour. And I think that's an apt phrase to use. We know the meaning of the phrase 11th hour, because it means that there's an hour to be saved still. So what I'm saying to humanity is, if you look at yourselves at the moment, you look at the state of the world at the moment, believe me, this is not the world that God wants to see. And that is why I'm here now making this statement, because you've been given a chance now to change yourselves, to go through the process of what is called repentance or contrition, or in Greek metanoia. And this is not doing penance, it is about being penitent. It is about recognising what you've done in your life that is wrong, and then essentially not doing that again, and trying to stop other people from repeating the same mistakes, committing the same offences against God. And you may think you're a good person, you may think you look after your family and so on, but believe me, you're listening to a lot of anti-Messianic Zionist propaganda. If you put your family before humanity, the Zionists will do that, and they can do that far more effectively than you, by creating aristocracies and royal families and other inventions of law and so on, to actually rob your children of their natural birthright that God has given them in terms of the bounty that comes from the land we live on. So you can't believe in just the family, you've got to believe in God's law, essentially.
But doesn't charity begin at home?
Charity always begins at home, and charity again has to be, in a sense, charity has to be from man to man, from human to human. What they've done with Babylon is they've reinvented charities. People now think they're doing good because they're working for these charities, but believe me, these charities are all part of the Babylonian credit system, which is robbing people in the third world and robbing people in this country now. We're paying more and more taxes for less and less in the way of services and return, essentially, because of that system. And also they're using the charity shops to put small traders out of business as well, because where there used to be a second-hand trade, that's now all going to the charity shops. This is another way of enslaving people in the Babylonian system, rather than allowing them to be free men and trade essentially on their own terms, basically. And I'm actually, bear in mind the story of the Bible, because people will think that these charities do good by giving money to the poor in Africa and so on. But if we remember the Bible story of the old widow who comes in and quietly puts her entire wealth, her 2 pennies in the collection plate in the temple, basically. Very quietly does it and goes and prays to God. And then Moneybags walks in with bags of money compared to her, hundreds, perhaps thousands of times what she has, and he makes a big song and dance, says, look at me, and what I put in the collection plate. Now obviously when you're asked in the Sunday school as a child, you say who gives the most, and as a percentage it's obvious even to a child that somebody who gives away all their wealth to others is doing some greater percentage of their wealth than somebody who's got lots and lots of money and gives away a tiny fraction of it. And of course charity, as I say, has to be slightly painful to give. If the charity isn't painful, it's not charity basically. You can just simply afford to give that money away, and that's not difficult, and God knows that. So all these rich people who give a tiny bit of their income away thinking they're serving charity are not. It's because it's not difficult for them. And then of course the cynics will say, well, this man, Moneybag, walks into the church, he gives all this wealth to the church can use to feed the poor, and that stops suffering. But then God says no, the actual light brought to the world by that woman far surpasses any wealth he will bring, far surpasses any interim benefit that you may for one day feed the poor, or feed the poor for 1 week. Because people who feed the poor only make the poor dependent. And this is what's happened with charities. You might think when you're giving your money to a charity to feed the poor in Africa, you're doing something good. But you're not. You're actually subsidising American agribusiness who grow the food for these people. And therefore subsidising GM crops as well, which I'm sure you're ultimately opposed to. But that's something you've got to be aware of. Those are the kind of tricks that Babylon will play on you, and that's why it's up to you to take responsibility for yourself and check that when you give money to these charities, in fact, I say, check it and you'll find that actually very little money is going to the people in the first place anyway. So I would say to you, don't give money to charities. You see a man in the street needs some money, give him it. That's true charity, basically. And then, yeah, we come on to, I was on the theme really of Remembrance Day, because we're coming up to 11/11 as well, because the 11th hour and 11/11 are also associated with the end of the First World War, the first woe that is predicted in the book of Revelation, basically. And as I was saying yesterday, we've had 3 woes, the 3 world wars. It's just the third one never got off from the ground in the way the anti-Messianic Zionists wished. The sense of the people and the goodness of the people was what stopped that. Not the goodness of our leaders, notice, the goodness of the good people out there who protested against it and so on. All our leaders in our mainstream parties are all warlords. They're all war criminals, basically. And this is what I find very hard at times, because people will tell me that people like Harriet Harman, for example, is an inspiration to young women. People should follow her. And they have a go at me. Well, all I've ever been is a man of peace who's tried to use the law to change things. Harriet Harman, under the principles of the Nuremberg Convention, is a war criminal who would have hung from a rope, basically, for complicity in the actions of lawfully invading Afghanistan and Iraq. So bear that in mind. Harriet Harman, whose name is actually sexist as well, I don't know why she hasn't changed it to Harriet Harperson, is a war criminal. So when you come with your criticisms and your judgments of other human beings, bear that in mind. But also as well, Harriet Harman talks about what she thinks are equal rights. She says that the Labour Party should have if the leader's a man, the deputy should be a woman. Or if the leader's a woman, the deputy should be a man. But that's discrimination. That's discrimination against talent. What if you've got 2 talented men at one time? Or indeed, 2 talented women? And you have to put a man and a woman in there because that's what your party rules say. You're not playing with the best people that God's given you, with the best of their talent. So you can't really expect to succeed. And often people who talk about equal rights are actually in favour of discrimination. We've just recently heard in the last few days that Babylonian law is going to refuse to give men equal access to their children. The situation that's already exists, of course, and this will continue. Now that is discrimination against men. If men want to have an interest in the upbringing of their child, they have half a right to that child in the same way as a woman does. And on this subject, I want to bring up a very contentious issue. That if there is a man who has impregnated a woman and he wants to have that child, why is he ignored now? Because it is equally his child. The child, of course, belongs to God, but both parents are equal stewards of that child. So it strikes to me that is an enormous lack of equal rights in the law, that a man has no rights over his unborn child when a woman does. And as I say, we're in a situation now with all of this stuff in the same way where it's become extremely hypocritical, basically. That we now have a protest outside St Paul's. And we have the church dragging their feet. This is a church being funded by equity fund managers. Yes, a church being funded by the usurers. And we have the church trying to throw the protesters off church property. I.e., the church is trying to throw away from the church or banish from the church those who are following the teachings of Christ, even if they don't know they're following the teachings of Christ, even if they've gone there as political left-wingers or concerned liberals or whatever else. What they are protesting for is the right for people not to be exploited. And we've seen the banners outside. End usury now. And why does the church understand that? Why is the church that's supposed to operate under the law of God benefiting from people who are the ultimate criminals under the law of God, the international bankers? So it should be obvious to any churchman who you support. You support the people standing outside the cathedral who are standing up for the spirit of the teachings of Christ, and you condemn those in the church who think that those people should be thrown away. They are the evil ones. They are the oppressors. They have used God's church for oppression, not for freedom, not for liberty. And you have every right to protest there. And if they send in the police, like they did in the Dale Farm case, I will support you, and I will ensure that you have every right to resist that as peaceful protesters and have every right to continue following the teachings of Jesus. But the day I want to make 11/11/11 a real Remembrance Day is because we go there every year, and we're supposed to remember. We're supposed to remember this enormous sacrifice made by young men for the good of this country. Yeah, why do we keep on having to remember? Why, if we remember correctly, is there an Iraq or an Afghanistan when we see the needless deaths of innocent young men? Why does that happen? Because our leaders are not beholden to you, the people. They're beholden to the bankers in whose interest it is to create war, because war equals more debt, equals more slavery, equals more control. Why is the church playing its role in this paradigm? Why isn't the church giving up its buildings and land to the people to put into practice the true teachings of Christ? Why have you made the whole thing so boring, for God's sake? You know, this is a celebration of God, the greatest thing in creation, and all you can do is those bloody services. Well, those 17th and 18th century nonsense that people don't even understand these days. That's not the teachings of Jesus. Jesus is a living spirit, a living credo of belief that updates. And therefore, as I say, we will find in the hearts of the protesters the true spirit of Jesus. And we will also find in the true spirit of Jesus those who genuinely protest against war. And don't be made by the Zionists to wear a poppy. If you don't want to wear a poppy, don't wear one. In fact, it's much better to give the money and not wear the poppy. That's the true teachings of Jesus. He says, be charitable, but don't be ostentatious about it. Go there quietly and pray to yourself. Don't pray in front of others to make them think you're a religious and spiritual man. And I say, if we were truly remembering, we would remember the young men who were executed by officers on the orders of officers of the British Army for falling asleep in their positions during the war. We should remember them now and look at the leaders of our military and the leaders of our country and seeing if they're still doing the same things now, because nobody would think men who fell asleep on duty or men who were shell-shocked should have been executed. And yet the psychopaths in the British officer class made sure that happened time and time again. So let us remember that on this Remembrance Day. And I say, remember, 11-11-11. It stops now. I've written to David Cameron to say war is over if he wants it, and clearly he doesn't. He has taken the same path as Thatcher, as Blair. He is a war criminal, and he is now saturated in the blood of the innocent. And those who are saturated in the blood of the innocent will be brought to justice. And that brings me on to my next point. That if you will not enforce the law, if you will break the law and operate outside the rule of law, you are wrong. And I will appoint my own officers of the law to deal with you. I have a perfect right to do so, and those officers you will not be able to bring to justice. Only I will be able to bring those officers to justice. And if you do not listen to my policemen, I will create my own lords, and we will go to the House of Lords and ensure that we are heard, that the voice of truth and the voice of justice is heard. Because for too long in that building it has echoed hollowly. Well, we have seen laws passed which put innocent men in prison, which turn a blind eye to torture, which in fact make a nonsense of law, basically. The 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act criminalises the victim of a crime. What sort of correspondence can that be with reason, to make a victim a criminal and create more problems in his life by punishing him than he would have done from taking the actual substance himself? That makes absolutely no sense. But also, you've backed the oil industry, you've backed the nuclear industry, you have hidden the true plant from the covenant of God, the herb. Marijuana can solve all of our problems. It can solve everything. We can build with it, we can solve pollution. The fact that you have stopped people hearing about that, you have put people in prison for trying to develop hemp, means again you're against God. You have committed the most enormous crimes against God. The 1937 Marijuana Tax Act in the US must be the most pernicious piece of legislation in human history. The fact that we continue to ban these drugs, and we know from the experience of the prohibition of alcohol, it simply led to more money for organised crime, and in this day and age more money for terrorists. So remember that. If you want the cannabis banned, you are backing terrorists and organised criminals. That in itself is also an assault upon the rule of law. And I say to people like David Cameron, I don't have great armies behind me. I don't have fifth columnists. I don't know who's come into the country in recent months, and neither has Theresa May. I don't have people who can hack into your computers. I don't have people who can blow up your motorways. But I don't want to use those methods of getting you to see sense, because what I want you to do is look at what I've got to say and judge it for yourself as a man, using your intellect, your reason, but ultimately your heart. To look into your own heart and see that when you cause war, all you cause is destruction. And I would gladly put you on trial, Cameron, for the invasion of Libya and what you did there. Again, it was an act of violence. It was designed to stop Colonel Gaddafi using gold and creating a stable African currency, because in that case your currencies would have fallen apart. So it's purely an economic measure, also to control the oil industry. It had absolutely nothing to do with the welfare of the people of Libya. If you're so concerned by the welfare of people, what about Saudi Arabia? What about Nigeria? What about Zimbabwe? All these other places you could go in and create a humanitarian effort. But no, you chose one country which is actually trying to undermine your finance in the world. You've killed people on behalf of the international bankers. You are a sick, sick man. And I say, if I look at all of this, I will see that you caused the problems. But I'm not blaming you totally. I'm actually blaming, there's two bodies of people, I believe, for the problems that have happened in my lifetime that I've seen with my own eyes and witnessed through my own experiences. And those two groups of people are judges who are violating the oath day in, day out, who are actually making money, tens of thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands of pounds a year by putting people in prison, even on remand, even innocent people. They put in prison or subsequently acquitted. They make money from the period of them being on remand. Are you going to let the judges get away with that? Are you going to let the judges who've been detected in Operation Or to infiltrate paedophiles and expose paedophiles, whose names have been exposed? We've seen people prosecuted from this list, people like Chris Langham. And yet the judges and other officers of the law who are on that list have been subject to confidentiality laws, basically. Now, I'm again saying to David Cameron, if you want to comply to law, you publish that list and those judges are brought to justice according to law. And again, I will bring these judges to justice if they do not operate the law. Because without the law, we have nothing. We live like animals. It is only then the rule of the strongest and the wealthiest. And that is why law is so important. And that is why these judges who have ignored the law, who have, as I say, made money for themselves by putting people in prison, at times innocent men, must be brought to justice, must pay recompense for what they have done wrong. And they've also turned a blind eye to war criminals. We also have Lord Hutton, who conducted an unlawful inquiry by not putting witnesses under oath. That inquiry does not conform to law. He therefore did not conform to the oath, and he deserves to be prosecuted for that. And if we start off with the idea that we have 4 years for a riot that didn't happen, or a prison sentence for stealing an ice cream, what then for a judge who has committed perjury, a separate offence every time he sat down in a court of law and not been under oath? He'll have committed the offence thousands of times. And therefore we should have consecutive sentencing. And starting at 4 years for somebody who didn't cause a riot, I would start with them at least 10 for perjury. Because that creates far more problems in our society than one man stealing an ice cream or one man organising a riot that doesn't happen. And again, newspaper editors are the same. They have invaded people's privacy. Now, bearing in mind, no corporation can have rights over a man. So as a newspaper, you have no right to invade any man's privacy whatsoever as a corporation. So again, I can use people to take actions against you. We will swear under oath that you unreasonably violated people's privacy, which is what you've done over the years, and this will include, of course, telephone hacking and following people around the streets. People have a right to a private life, not just privacy within their own home. Why are you following people around? It's almost like now we have a secret private army belonging to the media in this country who can expose them in the tabloid court of the media. And let's face it, if we don't have these inquiries, like a proper inquiry, under oath, into the death of David Kelly, we rely upon the newspapers, we rely upon trial by media. Now who? Is there one man in this country who would support trial by media over proper examination of evidence by people under oath and brought then to people who can objectively assess that evidence, unlike judges who are corrupt like Lord Hutton, basically?
Well, you've just mentioned quite a few professions that who are in the process of being brought to justice. You know, editors, politicians, police officers, judges, bankers. Isn't what you're saying, 11-11-11 being this period of atonement, isn't it going to happen naturally now anyway?
Well, the point is the cosmic gears have now moved towards 2012. The one thing that had to happen for that was the waking of the Christ. That's happened, basically, so the whole cosmic gears are changing. And it's up to people who are here to then modify their own behaviour and to live in love. Now, obviously, there's a sort of an idea out there among certain New Ages that everybody just automatically gets into the new world. But it doesn't work like that. God doesn't work like that. There's no collective consciousness. There's no idea that the whole species will go up. It's for each individual soul. Now, people find this hard to believe, but by coming here to play this vast game of dark and light polarity integration, which for the point of view of any soul can look extremely bleak. We live in a world of 1% light and 99% darkness. Therefore the souls who came here were the bravest souls in the universe. And those souls took a major step towards being a Christ by agreeing to come and play the game in the first place. So this whole game of dark and light polarity integration was over at a stroke. Almost. Because that game is now over. It's now up to you to look in your own heart and make the right decision about love, basically. This is not automatic. The events are moving, that will crash their system. But it's whether when their system crashes, there will be mass suffering, or whether we will all learn the lesson and look after each other. But can I just say as well, remind that as well on that subject, is we have in the last few days had another fulfillment of the prophecy I've been given by God, and that was that 11:11 would signal a period of solar activity which would affect the orbit of the moon, basically. And about 2 or 3 days ago, NASA reported one of the most massive solar flares we have seen in years, basically. We're coming up to 11:11, we're coming up to a full moon. I would suggest that all this is happening. And the sun doesn't just blast energy that we understand in terms of heat and light. The sun blasts us with spiritual energy. The sun is the representation of Jesus' consciousness at a certain level, basically. And therefore we are being blessed with divine light, and when these solar flares throw more of that divine light towards us, it's a chance for us to absorb some of it, to take a step upward in consciousness. But if we're not prepared to take that journey, that light will become so troubling to you that you may think you're going mad. And this is another message I need to get across, is if you're feeling troubled, don't go to see a doctor. He'll put you on some state-sanctioned, mind-controlled drug. That will only make things worse for you, because what it will do is bring your spiritual resonance down when God is trying to bring it up. Now, if you've got that stretching, what happens? Something gets torn apart, and you will finish up in a mental institution for the rest of your life. So, we'll say about these solar flares, this is only the beginning of a series of massive ones. We're expecting one about September next year, and one around about the actual end date of the 21st of December 2012. So it's important to say, to be aware of the light and to be aware of what effect it'll have on you. If you need to know the techniques for dealing with this, there are spiritual techniques of meditation, including the Kabbalistic cross and the banishing the pentagrams and invoking the pentagrams ritual, which I've explained many times, but if people need to know, they can come and talk to me about, basically.
So what you seem to be implying, well, not implying, sort of really waving the banner for, is this period of atonement and this route to redemption. It's very much about the individual and looking towards yourself. And I have actually heard you being quite disparaging against the group consciousness before. So it's all about looking to yourself, living in love and living in the moment. But I do notice you're wearing a Union Jack.
Yeah, no, it's funny that the way that symbols can be misrepresented. Obviously, it's mentioned in the Da Vinci Code that no symbol has a universal meaning. The symbols have meaning because certain people imbue them with meaning. And there'll be several people out there who will claim to be devil worshippers who will tell you that an inverted pentagram is somehow evil and represents the devil. It doesn't. It represents something completely different. But if they want to believe that, that's fine. But if I want to believe that it represents something completely different, which means something very spiritual to me as part of the development of mankind, I can also believe that. So we mustn't allow symbols. In fact, it's one of the greatest tests God gives us is to not imbue symbols with too much value. Understand they can inspire people, but that inspiration can both be for good and bad. So if you see someone burning your holy book, carry on loving them. Don't attack them, for God's sake. If you see somebody burning your holy symbols, they're trying to get a rise out of you. And you as a spiritual being should stay calm and carry on loving them, even though I accept that can be hard to do. And so I wear this symbol, the symbol that the left holds as the symbol of the repression of man for the empire and so on, that many people think is associated with the Zionists. When indeed it is a representation of Zion, but it's the Zion the Zionists don't like. Because in this flag, you have a part of the prophecy, that where the Messiah will be born, will be where this flag flies. It has the equal-armed cross. When it's on the jack, on a ship, it's a square flag. And it's on the shield of Britannia as well. It's equal-armed. So you have the equal-armed cross of the Messiah, and then you have the flash coming out of that, symbolic of the awoken Messiah. And you have both the red of Jesus and the blue, essentially, of Gaia, as the Holy Spirit, my Divine Mother and Divine Father, basically. So I always say we should claim the symbols back. There is a version of the swastika in the Third and Final Testament because the swastika is actually telling us about solar flares and sun cycles and peace and love, basically. The fact it got nicked by some people called the Nazis for a little while is of no concern to me. The power of that symbol is still there for good, basically. If you allow that symbol if you interpret that symbol as being something bad, that's up to you. It's only your own hatred. The hatred you feel for anything is in fact only a reflection of your own hatred of yourself. So if you learnt that, it would be fine. There's 3 rules in God's law. Love God, love your neighbour, but also love yourself. Because if you don't love yourself, you won't love the other 2, basically. And that's what I come down to with all of this. About 6 months ago, in accord with the prophecy, I published the 3rd and final testament on the allotted day. That testament can be read by any reasonable human being, and it will show you that God's law prevails. In fact, that only God can create law. Anything passed by a parliament or a government is merely a rule, it's merely a form of policy. And the difference between the 2 is law can be enforced, policy cannot. Policy requires your consent. So if you don't consent to it, it doesn't apply to you, basically. That puts a duty on you, obviously, not to harm the rights of another real human being, but then again, who of us wants to do that, basically? And if we start growing our own food and trading with each other, there'll be a lot less need to trample over other people's rights because things will be in abundance. It's only because a tiny percentage of people take all of the wealth for themselves that the rest of the world is forced to fight for a tiny, tiny share of the pie. And it's not like these people have got this because they are able. They have done it through title to land, which was given to them often because they're the bastard son of the king, or because they did some barbaric work for the king. Why should their descendant now profit from that, from God's land? No, you have entitled to that land, and if the aristocrat gets shirty about it, he's the one who should be compensating you for stealing the land off you, basically. It's that simplicity, the 3rd and final testament, and it's that simplicity you will find in God's law. But just to spice it up a bit, if you want to get into the 3rd and final testament, I will tell you, it's much like the rest of the Bible. It tells you, ultimately, the final destination. What it doesn't tell you is the route there. It gives you a few signposts, but it's up to you to find it out for yourself. It's got misdirection in it, things that I know are deliberately untrue, so you can read it and find those things for yourself as deliberately untrue, basically. Because that's all part of the journey. You're going to meet people, you're going to meet charlatans, particularly spiritual teachers. There's a lot of charlatan spiritual teachers out there, and you've got to know which ones are telling the truth and which ones are talking bullshit. So I say, this goes into the spirit of the Bible. Unlike the Bible, it hasn't actually got... the original Bible didn't have verses and chapters in, this doesn't have verses and chapters and such. But it does have a concession to modern publications, if you like. It quotes references for things, it has footnotes. And those are all integral parts of the 3rd and final testament. They can't be discarded because they're footnotes or because they're inconvenient. They are all there as part of the holistic meaning of that book. So this book taps in as the 3rd testament, the old, the new, the 3rd and final. This is part 1. Part 2 will most probably be the organisation, and part 3 will be other bits and pieces, like, for example, the king lists and so on. But in the version we have, there's a treasure map. A treasure map that will lead you to the Holy Grail. There's a treasure map that will tell you the solution to the Da Vinci Code and other things. There's also a code game you can follow to find out the identity of the beast if you want to do that. And I find it curious that it's at this point I speak to you about the 3rd and final testament. Because people think there is an opposition between science and God. There isn't. There is opposition between science and religion, but religion's for stupid people, for the munchkins. Of course it is. You know, people who think there's a problem with science from religions have a problem with themselves, basically. God's approach to everything is that you are to understand God's creation. In fact, I love the definition of Kabbalah. Kabbalah is an attempt to understand God's creation so you better understand yourself as a fractal of that creation. And if you understand that sentence, you're on your way to understanding the universe, basically. And the universe, of course, works on reason. It doesn't work on blind faith. Of course, God's universe is subject to reason. What else would it be subject to? If it's not subject to reason, it'll be subject to arbitrary justice, like we have in our courts today. And that, like we've seen, caused so many problems for the world, basically. Of course, God conforms to reason. And that's what the journey's all about, is understanding the nature of that reason. That God is not like a man. Of course he's not, because he sees far more than we do. He's in a position to truly test us. And anybody who thinks that they are God, I don't really understand what they're telling me. Are they telling me they can create universes? Because I've not seen anyone do it yet. In fact, I think it's the height of arrogance, the height of ego for anybody to think they are God and entirely in control of their destiny. Of course they're not. And obviously these people are New Age. When I say to them, what about karma? They've heard of karma, so they think, something, hang on, can I be God? And can karma still work? And at least that gets them thinking anyway, because half the problem with these people is they go around spouting this idea, spouting that idea, which any idiot can do. Any munchkin can imitate somebody else like a bloody chimpanzee or a parrot. What you've got to understand, of course, is how God's creation fits together, how the 7 chakras fit with the 10, 11 spheres on the tree of life. And how indeed that fits with quantum mechanics, because it's quantum mechanics that's truly, truly helped us understand the nature of God, that made it possible for me to go on this journey. And if there's one bit I have a slight regret about leaving out the Third and Final Testament, it's the fact that I was taken on this journey not ultimately by anything other than reading Stephen Hawking and reading Kabbalah straight afterwards. There were steps on my journey. There was reading the Sermon on the Mount in prison. There was the first reading of the Bible Code and realising that this showed that something curious was going on beyond the 4 dimensions.
Well, to stop you there, I think going into quantum physics now, it's really interesting, and there are huge parallels between. But it's...
Can I just say it's one of these 3 things? They're very simple to understand. They have an enormous understanding of creation. 3 things from quantum mechanics, very easy to understand. First one, there is a Big Bang. All the energy is contained in one atom, which explodes. In Kabbalah, you have the flash of creation, the orgasm of the universe, basically. And all the energy is God, and that is God that infuses everything. These are the same concepts using different vocabularies. In according to Stephen Hawking, there are 10, 11 dimensions in the universe. On the tree of life, there are 10 dimensions attached and 1 not attached. So we have the same concept there again. And Hawking says that 1 to 5% of the universe is observable, the rest is dark matter. Kabbalah says we're in around 1% light and 99% darkness. Having read those 2 things together, I suddenly realised that actually the Kabbalists had known us a lot longer than the quantum physicists. But that was what took me on my journey. And that's what I'm saying to everybody. You may think you're an atheist out there. You may think you have nothing to do with this. But what you're actually ruling out is religion. You do not understand God. If you understand God, you understand quantum mechanics and vice versa.
Well, I'm really interested to find out about the orgasm of creation, but at the moment, I think it's better timed a bit later on.
All right, okay. Can I say the speed of light as well? Because that's what I was meant to mention, is that the Bible, of course, says there was God. And God said, let there be light. So, from the Bible, we know there is something that is greater than light. In recent days, we've finally had revealed the results of an experiment carried out at CERN, in which they have now identified subatomic particles called neutrinos, or tachyons as they were called in Star Trek, which can go faster than the speed of light, i.e. there is something beyond light. I could say now, the scientists were wrong when they said that nothing could go beyond the speed of light, as they've been wrong about relativity, and they've been wrong about just about the Newtonian universe. But that's not the way it should happen. I respect all of those scientists for being prepared to put forward a version of the universe that works in 99% of the times to help our understanding on that journey. But make no mistake, the Bible talked about something beyond light. Scientists have only just found that out. And of course you're a science fiction fan. Star Trek will tell you that we have now qualified as being a post-warp species, i.e. a species that has discovered faster than light speed, is now open to approaches from other alien civilizations. So where are they? Instead of exactly the opposite, we've had the American president recently going on record saying that the Americans do not have any contact whatsoever with extraterrestrial life forms. And indeed, the likelihood of life developing elsewhere in the universe is pretty minimal. So it's absolutely consistent with the laws of probability that only life will evolve in one place, and that is on this planet. And that the place to be for these end times is a place called Enderland, or England. And on that note, I will leave you. God bless.
And that was God's ultimate authority on this planet going on a bit.